The silence was a thick shroud, heavier than any I'd ever known. It pressed in, not just on my ears, but on my chest, a physical weight that made breathing feel like an act of defiance. For months now, every sound had been a phantom limb, an echo of what was no longer there. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a truck, the creak of floorboards in the empty house, each one was a reminder of her absence. A sharp jab where the dull ache had momentarily subsided. I missed the gentle rustle of her turning a page, the clink of her teacup, the soft murmur of her voice even when she wasn't speaking to me. Now, there was only this profound, cavernous stillness. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I ran them over the cold, chipped porcelain of the teacup. It was hers, one of a set we'd bought on a whim from a flea market, its delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the rough reality of my life. The tea, a bitter, lukewarm brew, did little to warm me. I sat at the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture I hadn't yet packed, watching the dust motes dance in the weak morning light filtering through the grimy window. Every surface was coated in a fine, grey film, a testament to neglect. My neglect. It had been an accident, they said. A tragic misstep. But the words felt hollow, a flimsy curtain drawn over a gaping wound. I could still see it, every horrifying detail replaying behind my eyelids whenever I dared to close them. The thrill, the foolish, reckless thrill that had drawn us to the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. We'd snuck past the rusted chain-link fence, the warning signs bleached to illegibility, seeking beauty in decay, a shared adventure. The air inside had been thick with the smell of damp concrete and something else, something metallic and acrid, like old blood and rust. Graffiti-scarred walls loomed, sharp fronts boarded up, ghostly mannequins frozen in forgotten poses. We'd laughed, our voices echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty space, a sound that now grated on my memory. We were exploring the third floor, its floorboards rotting when she pointed. A patch of sunlight, brilliant and pure, pierced a hole in the collapsed roof, illuminating a faded mural of some long-dead cartoon character. She moved closer, a light step, her camera already raised. Floor gave way. Not a slow crumble, but a sudden, violent splintering, a shriek torn from her throat. My hand shot out, desperate, grasping at air. Then nothing. I remember the dust, thick and choking, rising like a malevolent spirit, obscuring everything. The authorities, the emergency services, the grim faces of the first responders, it was all a blur. All I heard was the drone of their voices, distant, meaningless. They pulled me away. A colleague, his face etched with pity, had held me back as I tried to claw through the debris, screaming her name until my throat was raw. He kept repeating, "There's nothing you could have done, William." But I knew he was wrong. I had done something. I had let her go. The will had arrived 2 weeks later, a crisp, official document that felt alien in my trembling hands. My estranged grandmother's estate. A remote Victorian manor, nestled deep in the forgotten hills of the countryside. It felt like a sign, a desperate final chance, an escape. I needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. The drive had been interminable. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the already indistinct landscape. The road dwindled from asphalt to gravel, then to a muddy track, hemmed in by ancient gnarled trees that clawed at the grey sky. My navigation system, usually so precise, struggled, its signal flickering in and out. The isolation was absolute. No other cars, no distant lights, just the rhythmic thwack of the wipers and the growing thrum of my own anxiety. Then, through a break in the trees, it appeared. The manor. It wasn't just old. It was ancient. A skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight. A wide, decaying porch wrapped around the front, its railings splintered, its paint peeling in long, curling strips. A wild tangle of overgrown shrubs and thorny roses choked the yard, pressing against the house like grasping hands. I stepped out, pulling my coat tighter, and was immediately assaulted by the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like forgotten iron and old roses. The front door, heavy in oak, groaned open with a sound like a dying beast. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something indefinable like old paper and dried flowers, but with an underlying current of something sharp, almost electrical. I ran my hand along a banister, the wood smooth but coated in a film of grime. To my left, a sitting room shrouded in white sheets, its furniture ghostly forms. To my right, another equally shrouded room. The only light came from the tall, arched windows, filtering through the grime and the heavy velvet drapes that had long since lost their color. The house was a monument to stillness, to a past long settled and forgotten, or so it seemed. As I stood there, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air stirred the fine dust motes around me. It sounded like a name. Not my name, her name. Had I finally lost my mind, or was the house already calling to me? The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only concession to modernity, a fragile thread of white noise against the oppressive, ancient stillness of the house. I had spent the night wrestling with the heavy air, the suffocating quiet that seemed to absorb every breath I took. Each creak of settling timber, each whisper of wind against a loose pane felt amplified, a personal address from the very walls around me. This wasn't just a house. It was a vast, echoing tomb, and I was its sole, unwilling mourner. I pushed myself out of the armchair I'd collapsed into, the leather groaning a protest that sounded too much like a sigh. My limbs felt heavy, weighted down by a sorrow that had seeped into my very bones. The morning light, pale and watery, did little to dispel the gloom that clung to the corners of the grand parlor. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams, illuminated briefly before vanishing back into the pervasive gray. I needed to move, to break the spell of inertia that the house seemed to cast. My first impulse was to begin the arduous task of sorting, of sifting through the layers of my grandmother's life. But the thought of touching her things, of disturbing the carefully preserved dust of decades, felt like an intrusion. I wasn't ready for that kind of intimacy with a past I barely knew. Instead, I craved a different kind of quiet, a familiar desolation. The winding country lanes eventually gave way to cracked asphalt and crumbling retail park signs. I knew of a place, a local legend among those who sought to lose themselves in the husks of forgotten dreams. It was a monument to abandonment, a sprawling concrete skeleton that had once pulsed with life and commerce. I needed to walk through its vacant corridors to feel a different kind of emptiness, one that wasn't tied to personal grief. I parked my car near a slumped concrete barrier, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The air here was different, tinged with the metallic scent of rust and the damp, earthy smell of encroaching weeds. Above the entrance, barely legible through layers of grime, were the faded block letters. Abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. The sheer scale of the place was staggering. Skylights, fractured and webbed with grime, cast sickly grey light onto a floor littered with shattered glass, discarded flyers, and the skeletal remains of display stands. My breath plumed in front of me, a visible testament to the biding temperature. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the vast space. I ran a hand over a display counter, the laminate peeling, sharp edges threatening my skin. The decay here was absolute, a testament to time's relentless march. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a collapsed rack in what might have once been a children's clothing store, a small wooden music box. It was surprisingly intact, carved with an intricate, repeating pattern of intertwining vines and strange, angular symbols. It felt ancient, out of place among the faded plastic and synthetic fabrics. I picked it up, noting its unexpected weight. The lid was tightly shut, and there was no key. A forgotten relic, lost to the collapse. Why would it be here? It was indistinct, like a name half-spoken, a phrase swallowed by the wind. I froze, my head cocked, listening. Nothing. Just the mournful sigh of the wind through a broken window pane, the creak of unseen stress in the structure. I tucked the music box into my jacket pocket, its smooth surface pressing against my ribs. I had seen enough of this desolate landscape. It merely echoed the one I carried within. The music box in my pocket felt like a warm stone. Its presence seemed to alter the room, making it feel less empty, but also more watchful. I forced myself to begin. The library was my first target, a room lined floor-to-ceiling with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked and faded. The scent of old paper and dust filled my nostrils, thick and cloying. I ran my hand along the spines, feeling the rough texture of ancient leather, the delicate give of brittle pages. My grandmother's intellectual pursuits, a world I never knew she inhabited. Behind a particularly dense collection of obscure folklore texts, I found a small, ornate wooden box. It wasn't the music box, but a different kind of container, its surface smooth, polished, and surprisingly dust-free. The lid was secured by a tarnished brass clasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed velvet, were a handful of sepia-toned photographs. My grandmother, much younger, but undeniably her. The second showed her with a man I didn't recognize, his arm around her, a faint, unsettling smile on his lips. They stood before a structure that looked remarkably like this very house, though less overgrown, less burdened by time. It looked like heat haze, but the day in the photograph appeared overcast. My eyes must be tired. The final photograph made my breath hitch. It was of a small child, no older than 5, clutching a doll. And in the background, just visible over the child's shoulder, was a glimpse of a familiar, intertwining vine pattern. The same pattern carved into the music box I'd found at the abandoned mall. How could that be? How could a discarded trinket from an abandoned mall bear the same unique marking as something belonging to my grandmother, found hidden away in her library? As I considered the impossible coincidence, the ornate chandelier above me flickered once, then twice, plunging the room into momentary gloom before sputtering back to full, albeit dim, illumination. A draft, I rationalized, a fault in the old wiring. It spoke no words I could discern, only a breathy, ancient rustle. My heart began to beat a frantic tattoo against my ribs. I spun around, my gaze sweeping the room, but there was nothing. My imagination. I needed to eat. I needed to sleep. I was exhausted, stressed, and seeing things. I pushed the photographs back into the box, closing the clasp with a decisive click. I needed to find a place where I could just be, where the echoes of the past weren't quite so loud. I wandered deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing on bare floorboards, my hand trailing along dusty banisters. I found myself in a long, narrow corridor, lit only by a single, grimy window at its far end. On one wall, half hidden by a threadbare tapestry depicting a hunting scene, was a heavy oak chest. There was no keyhole visible, only a strange, deeply carved indentation in the shape of a twisted knot. My fingers traced the cold metal of the lock, then the intricate carving. It felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. A sense of unease settled over me, a subtle tightening in my chest. What secrets did my grandmother keep so heavily guarded? And why did this chest, in this forgotten corridor, feel like it was waiting for me? Each creak from the old timbers above my head felt like a deliberate observation, a slow, patient judgment. My eyes, gritty from lack of sleep, scanned the familiar contours of the living room, trying to find reassurance in the solid oak of the mantelpiece, the faded floral pattern of the armchair. There was nothing, only the weight of the silence pressing in. I tried to rationalize it. The house was old. Every old house had its noises. The wind howled through loose window panes, the floorboards settled, pipes groaned. Grief did that, I told myself, twisting the mundane into the menacing. It was just grief, a trick of the light, a trick of the mind. Then I heard it. It wasn't the wind, it was a name. William, my name, spoken with a lightness, a familiar lilt that made the hairs on my arms prickle. It was her voice. Impassable. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat, every muscle rigid. The sound lingered, a ghost in the air, then dissolved into the pervasive quiet. My palms began to sweat. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin, reedy. It sounded like someone else speaking. The house swallowed the word, offered no reply. I walked slowly towards the hallway, my footsteps loud on the bare floorboards. Nothing. There was nothing there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I retreated, stumbling back into the living room, needing light, needing proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with sudden tremor. I needed to hear a real voice, a voice from the outside, a voice untainted by this place. I scrolled through my contacts, landing on a friend's name. He'd always been practical, grounded. He would tell me I was being an idiot. He would make it all go away. The phone rang twice, then his brisk, familiar voice filled the receiver. "William, everything all right? Haven't heard from you." No, no, I think I'm losing it, I stammered, the words tumbling out, desperate. The house, I keep hearing things, seeing things, him. There was a pause on the other end, a sigh I could almost feel. William, man, it's only been a few weeks. You're grieving. It's normal to feel her presence. You're isolated in that old place, just you and your thoughts. It's getting to you. No, it's more than that. It's real. I heard her voice, clear as day. Come back to the city. Get some fresh air. You're just cooped up, man. Your mind's playing tricks. It's grief. Call me when you've had some sleep. And then he was gone. The line went dead. His words, meant to soothe, felt like a fresh wound. Grief. It was always grief. No one understood. No one could understand. My hand trembled, the phone heavy and useless. It was marking me. My sanity, already a frayed rope, felt ready to snap. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from somewhere deep within the house. Not a floorboard, not the wind. It sounded like breaking glass. My breath hitched. Was it just the house settling or something else? The air around me shimmered. The solid oak mantelpiece seemed to waver, its edges blurring. The floral armchair softened, its pattern dissolving into an indistinct haze. The very walls of the living room began to stretch, ceiling soaring impassably high, the floor sinking away beneath my feet. My stomach lurched. I wasn't in the living room anymore. Above me, a skeletal steel framework clawed at the dim, dust-choked air, where a roof should have been. The air here was still, thick with the scent of damp concrete, mildew, and something metallic, like rust or old blood. This was the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. I remembered this place. We had come here once, years ago, on a foolish dare, the thrill of trespassing, the illicit quiet. But it wasn't like this. My heart leaped, a desperate, foolish hope flaring. He was here, she wasn't gone. I stumbled forward, my feet crunching on scattered debris, shards of glass and desiccated leaves. Here, I'm here. I shouted, my voice swallowed by the immense space, echoing back at me, distorted and thin. I rounded the corner, expecting to see her alive, whole. Instead, I saw a shape, not her, not entirely. It was a silhouette, tall and impassably thin, standing perfectly still amidst the wreckage of a clothing boutique. It wore a dress, one I recognized, a flowing summer dress he had loved. It was like a dress animated by a cruel breeze, yet there was no breeze in this dead place. The head tilted, a gesture that was hers, yet terrifyingly vacant. Two pinpricks of light, like distant, dying stars, glowed where eyes should have been. A low, guttural sound, like stones grinding together, emanated from the empty space where her mouth would be. It was trying to speak. It was trying to mimic her. My legs gave out. I fell to my knees, scraping them on the concrete, the pain a sharp, welcome anchor in the swirling madness. This wasn't grief. This wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was real, and it was wearing her. The figure took a step, then another, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. It reached out a long, impassably slender arm, draped in the familiar fabric, towards me. What was this? What had I done to deserve this horror? Was I truly losing my mind, or was this place, this thing, actively trying to break me? Was this truly happening, or was I still in the house, dreaming a nightmare that felt too real to escape? Each creak of the floorboards under my weight felt like a betrayal, echoing through the cavernous silence of the manor. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a fragile thread of white noise, had done little to soothe the previous night's unease. I had spent the night wrestling with the heavy air, the suffocating stillness that seemed to absorb every breath I took. Now, the morning light, thin and watery through grimy panes, offered no comfort. It merely illuminated the dust motes dancing in the oppressive quiet, each one a tiny ghost. I was done with simply feeling the house. If there were secrets, they were buried deep, but they were here. I was certain of it. I started in what I assumed was her study, a room on the second floor crammed with forgotten furniture and towering bookshelves. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and something metallic, like old pennies. I ran my hands over the spines of leather-bound volumes, their titles obscured by dust, feeling for any loose panel, any hidden latch. My fingers brushed against a section of wall behind a heavy oak desk, where the wallpaper seemed to ripple just slightly. It was almost imperceptible, a faint bulge that suggested something beneath. My heart gave a sudden hard thump against my ribs. I pressed harder, my breath catching in my throat. The wallpaper peeled back with a faint tearing sound, revealing a shallow indentation in the wood paneling beneath. It wasn't a seam, but a hairline crack, almost invisible unless I was looking for it. I traced the line, my fingertip finding a tiny, almost flush button. I pressed it. My fingers brushed against something brittle, paper-like. I pulled it out. The pages were yellowed and fragile, the ink a spiderweb of faded black script. A wave of nervous energy surged through me. This felt significant, a direct line to my grandmother's hidden thoughts. I carried it to the window, needing the meager light to decipher the hurried scrawl. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, as if written in haste or under duress. The first readable date was years ago, long before her eventual passing. The house shifts, not physically but in its hum, a low thrum beneath the floorboards, not the pipes. Faint at first like wind through dry leaves, but they are here, always here. My eyes widened. I'd heard them too, hadn't I? Or had I merely imagined them, a trick of a grieving mind? I flipped to a later page, the handwriting more frantic, lines scrawled over each other. They want something. I don't know what. They speak in echoes, never clearly, but the intent. I feel them watching, always watching. My gaze snagged on a single, stark word, underlined multiple times. The pact. Beneath it, in a barely legible script, was a frantic account. It began with the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. Such foolishness. We thought it was just a thrill, the four of us. We found the opening, deep in the old service tunnels, beneath the ruined food court, a strange symbol carved into the concrete. And then, the sound. He said it was just the wind, the collapsing structure, but I felt it. A presence. It followed us out. It attached itself. It demanded. And we agreed for the family, for the lineage, a terrible bargain. They promised prosperity, but the price is unbearable. It takes one of us each generation, a host, the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. My grandmother had been involved in something truly terrifying, something that reached beyond a simple haunting, a pact. It wasn't just this house, it was my family, a legacy of horror. My hands were shaking so violently, the brittle pages threatened to tear. This wasn't grief playing tricks on me. This wasn't some residual energy. This was a direct, inherited threat. My grandmother knew. He had documented it. He had lived with it. What exactly had they promised? And what did it mean? To be the next host. The words still echoed in my mind, a chilling refrain that drowned out the usual creaks and groans of the old house. The abandoned mall. Urban exploration gone wrong. My grandmother, a pact, a family history entwined with something truly monstrous. The revelation clung to me, a cold film on my skin, making every shadow seem deeper, every silence more profound. I paced the study, the heavy tomes on the shelves now marking monuments to forgotten knowledge. What had I stumbled into? Not just a haunting, not just a house with secrets, but a legacy, a curse. I stopped by the window, staring out at the rain-streaked panes. Beyond them, the gnarled branches of ancient oaks clawed at the bruised sky. The isolation of the manor, once a balm, now felt like a trap. I was alone here, utterly alone, with a truth too vast and too terrifying to comprehend. My breath hitched. This wasn't some abstract concept. It was concrete, specific. The details of my wife's death, the accident, the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. How could my grandmother have known? Unless she hadn't just known. Unless he had been involved. A shiver traced its way down my spine, independent of the house's draft. My gut clenched. This was no longer about solace or a fresh start. This was about survival. I had to understand. I had to fight, but fight what? An entity, a pact, a twisted family history that reached beyond the veil of the living. I turned from the window, the room suddenly too still, too heavy. The air felt thick, like wading through forgotten memories. A faint scent, almost imperceptible at first, drifted past me. Jasmine, my wife's favorite perfume. My heart gave a violent lurch, a painful spasm in my chest. I tried to dismiss it, a phantom scent, a trick of a grief-addled mind, but it intensified, becoming cloying, sickly sweet, like an overblown bloom left too long in the sun. Then came the sound. Not a distinct word, but a breathy, drawn-out sigh that seemed to curl around the edges of the room. It was too soft to pinpoint, too pervasive to ignore. It tickled my ears, a low hum that vibrated in my bones. I strained, listening, my muscles tensing. Nothing. Just the house settling, I told myself. Just the wind. It was pregnant with a presence. The temperature in the study plummeted, a sudden, sharp drop that raised gooseflesh on my arms. My breath plumed in front of me. I could see it, a faint, wispy cloud. This wasn't a draft. The room began to distort. The bookshelves seemed to stretch, their wooden frames bowing outwards, then inwards like an accordion. The patterns on the faded wallpaper swirled, no longer static designs but shifting currents, like water disturbed by an unseen hand. My eyes darted around, trying to grasp onto something solid, something real. But reality itself was fraying at the edges. A name, my name, spoken in a voice that was hers, yet not hers. It was deeper, raspy, laced with an unfamiliar malice that made my stomach churn. It was a distortion, a vile mimicry. And then I saw her. She stood in the corner of the room where the light struggled to reach, bathed in the sickly green glow of a flickering phantom light. Not my wife, not really. This was a grotesque caricature. Her hair, usually a vibrant auburn, hung in lank, greasy strands, obscuring half her face. Her dress, when I remembered her wearing, was tattered and stained, clinging to a form that was too gaunt, too elongated. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost broken, and her smile was a rictus of pure, unadulterated hatred. It stretched her lips too wide, revealing too many teeth that looked too long, too sharp. Her eyes, oh God, her eyes. They weren't the warm brown I remembered. They were bottomless pits of obsidian, reflecting nothing, absorbing all light, all hope. And in their depths I saw it. A flash of a crumbling concrete wall, graffiti-scarred, the shattered panes of a skylight, the skeletal remains of a rusted escalator, the impassable, undeniable image of the abandoned mall urban exploration gone wrong. She took a step, then another. Her movements were jerky, disjointed, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a madman. Each step was accompanied by a soft, wet thump that seemed to echo inside my skull. The jasmine scent became overpowering, choking me, filling my lungs with its sickly sweetness. "William," the voice rasped again, closer now, emanating from that distorted mouth. It was a sound that tore at the fabric of my sanity. "You left me." My breath caught in my throat. My legs locked, rooted to the spot. This wasn't grief playing tricks. This wasn't a memory. This was a direct assault, a violation of everything sacred. This was her, twisted into a weapon designed to break me. She raised a hand, long, skeletal fingers tipped with jagged, broken nails. She pointed a finger at me, accusing. "You didn't look hard enough." The words were a hammer blow. The green light flickered, dimmed, and vanished. The jasmine scent evaporated. The walls of the study snapped back into place, solid and mundane. The light from the lamp steadied. I was alone. Again. The phantom image of her malevolent face burned behind my eyelids. It was real. This was real. Whatever entity inhabited this house, whatever ancient pact bound my family, it knew my deepest wounds. It knew what would shatter me. It had manifested. It had shown itself, using the very image of my lost love to taunt and terrify. What else did it know about me? What else could it twist? The cold sweat plastered my shirt to my back. My breath hitched in my throat, tasting of dust and stale fear. The study was normal again, yes, but the normalcy felt thin, a paper-thin skin stretched over something monstrous. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the desk, grip tight. It had been real. More real than anything I'd ever experienced, certainly more real than the comforting lie of sanity I'd been clinging to. The whispers, the green light, the cloying jasmine, they weren't grief-induced hallucinations. They were something else, something that twisted the air, that warped the very walls. I couldn't stay here, not without understanding. The house was a trap, or a prison, or perhaps both. My grandmother's journals, her cryptic notes, the faded photographs of strangers with eyes that seemed too wide, too vacant. They were not just the ramblings of a lonely old woman. I started with the study itself, a frantic energy coursing through me. I pulled books from shelves, their leather spines crumbling to powder beneath my fingers. I flipped through ledgers, their pages brittle and yellowed, filled with meticulous but indecipherable script. My grandmother's handwriting, elegant yet spidery, filled dozens of notebooks. Most were mundane entries about household expenses or garden plans, but scattered throughout were odd passages. Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne. Who was Elias Thorne? The name didn't ring any bells. No relative I'd ever heard of. But the urgency of her scrawl, the way the ink bled through the cheap paper, suggested a significance beyond a mere acquaintance. There was a date next to one of the Elias entries, October 17th, 1968. I needed something outside these walls, something to corroborate the madness that now felt like a suffocating blanket. The nearest town, a sleepy cluster of buildings an hour's drive away, held a small public library. It was less a repository of knowledge and more a quiet mausoleum for forgotten paperbacks. The librarian, a stout woman with spectacles perched on her nose, gave me a quizzical look as I explained my interest in local history. I didn't mention the green light. I just said I was researching my family tree. I spent hours hunched over microfiche readers, squinting at grainy newspaper archives. The town was small, its history mostly unremarkable. But then I found it. A small article tucked away on page 3 of the October 20th, 1968 edition of the Blackwood Gazette. Local man disappears from abandoned mall site my breath caught. The article described him as a local eccentric. Last seen heading towards the old Blackwood Mall construction site, which had been abandoned years prior due to unforeseen structural issues. The police had found his car, keys still in the ignition, but no sign of Elias. No struggle, no note, just gone. A place I knew by reputation, a ghost of a dream that had never materialized. It was just a few miles from the manor, hidden deep in a neglected stretch of woods. Why had my grandmother been so obsessed with Elias Thorne? Had he been another victim, another fading? I had to go there. The library offered no more. The librarian was beginning to eye me with an uncomfortable mix of curiosity and suspicion. I left. The image of that newspaper headline burned into my mind. The drive was short, the dirt road quickly giving way to an overgrown, crumbling asphalt path. The abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. It was a concrete husk, a monument to forgotten ambition. Twisted rebar poked from cracked foundations. Graffiti, faded and peeling, covered what remained of the walls. The air inside was still and stale, smelling of damp concrete, mildew, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that prickled my nostrils. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the collapsed roof. I walked through the vast, empty spaces where department stores once dreamed of standing. Every creak of my shoe on the broken tile echoed unnaturally, prolonged, distorted. My own breathing sounded too loud. I searched the skeletal remains of the structure, following a gut feeling, a morbid curiosity. I found nothing of Elias Thorne, no forgotten wallet, no cryptic message scrawled on a wall. Only the ghosts of what might have been. The wind whistled through gaps in the concrete, sounding like a distant, mournful sigh. Then I saw it. The phrase from my grandmother's journals. The name of the entity, here, in this place. Elias Thorne hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken. The metallic tang in the air intensified, stinging my eyes. I felt a pressure building behind my temples, a faint, high-pitched whine starting at the edge of my hearing. They were starting again, faint, indistinct like static on an old radio. They weren't coming from the walls, not directly. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a local legend. This was a pattern, a generational curse. My family, entangled with something that lived in the periphery, that fed on memory and sanity. Something that had taken Elias Thorne, and perhaps others before him. Something that now wanted me. The woods felt even more menacing now, the trees like silent, ancient witnesses. I drove back to the manor in a haze, the symbol and the words the chorale of echoes branded into my mind. The house, when I finally reached it, seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The porch light flickered erratically. The air was heavy, charged. I had found my answers, or at least the beginning of them. But what did I do with this knowledge? How could I fight something that wasn't physical? Something that preyed on the very fabric of my mind? Something that had claimed generations of my family, and now seemed to be closing in on me here, in the place I was supposed to call home. What was its true nature, and what did it truly want? The metallic tang coated my tongue. A taste like old pennies and something else, something I couldn't quite name, but that felt ancient and wrong. My eyes were still fixed on the symbol, on the jagged void carved into the floorboards, a wound in the very structure of the house. Elias Thorne, taken, not just gone, but pulled into that absence. The thought sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the sudden drop in temperature. I swallowed hard, the taste persisting, a grim reminder. I would not be taken. I would not disappear. I spun around, my gaze sweeping the library. The familiar shelves, the dusty tomes, the ornate fireplace, they were all still there, yet they felt like a facade, a flimsy curtain drawn over something monstrous. The air hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, like a distant, dying machine. I moved towards the door, my steps slow, deliberate. My hand reached for the doorknob, cold brass beneath my fingers. I twisted. It didn't budge. I tried again, harder, rattling the handle. Locked. A dry chuckle, thin and reedy, seemed to echo from the corners of the room, bouncing off the spines of forgotten books. It wasn't my grandmother's laugh, nor anyone I knew. It was a sound that belonged to an empty space, a place where joy had long since been forgotten. I backed away from the door, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just a locked door. This was deliberate. I turned to the window, a desperate hope flaring. Thick, stained glass, framed by heavy velvet curtains, offered a view of nothing but an impenetrable fog, swirling beyond the pane. It pressed against the glass like a hungry beast, obscuring the familiar landscape, erasing the outside world. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration intensify. The house was no longer just a house. It was a cage. I had to get out. I moved to the other door, the one leading to the main hall, every exit sealed. I tried to think, to reason, but the metallic taste was stronger now, and the low hum vibrated directly behind my eyes. I pounded on the door, a series of dull thuds that seemed to absorb into the thick wood, making no sound beyond the immediate vicinity. No one would hear me. No one was here. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was utterly alone. Then, a subtle shift. The hum deepened, dropping an octave, becoming a low thrum that resonated through the floorboards, up my legs, into my chest. The library began to change. The ornate wallpaper shimmered, the floral patterns blurring, stretching, until they resembled faded, peeling advertisements. The rich scent of old paper and dust faded, replaced by the stale, metallic tang of decay and something else, something synthetic, like old plastic. The elegant, carved wooden ceiling seemed to recede, replaced by a vast, unfinished concrete expanse, crisscrossed with exposed conduits and rusted pipes. The grand fireplace, moments ago a symbol of domesticity, now stood as a crumbling, graffiti-scarred monument of broken bricks and blackened soot. This wasn't right. This wasn't the house. I looked around, my head snapping from side to side. The towering bookshelves, once filled with leather-bound volumes, were now empty, their shelves stripped bare, leaving only the skeletal framework of metal struts and warped particle board. The air, once heavy with the scent of aged paper and beeswax, now carried the distinct, acrid smell of stale popcorn and something metallic, like burnt wiring. I was no longer in my grandmother's library. I was in an abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. The vast space stretched before me, a desolate echo chamber of forgotten commerce. Broken mannequins lay scattered, limbs askew, their painted smiles frozen in the dust. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, stumbling forward. The polished marble floor was gone, replaced by cracked linoleum, sticky with unknown grime. The low thrum intensified, vibrating through my teeth. The space felt impassably vast, yet claustrophobic, pressing in on me from all sides. I saw a faint glow in the distance, a promise of an exit perhaps. I started to run, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The glow receded as I approached, a cruel mirage. Corridors stretched and twisted, leading me deeper into the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling place. Every turn brought me to another identical, desolate stretch of forgotten retail. It felt like the entity was breathing me in. The silence was punctuated only by the drip, drip, drip of water from a broken pipe somewhere in the darkness, and the low, persistent hum that was now a part of me, vibrating in my bones. Was this real? Or was I finally losing my mind? The line between the two blurred, dissolved. Not words, just a suggestion of sound, a phantom vibration. It spoke of loss, of emptiness, of what was no longer there. It spoke of my wife, of her touch, her scent, her laughter. Her face, vivid and heartbreaking, flashed behind my eyes. The entity wasn't just manipulating my environment, it was reaching into my deepest grief, twisting the knife. This wasn't just a physical trap, it was a mental one. The house, or whatever this was trying to break me, but why? What did it want? And how many others had it done this to before me? Elias Thorne. Taken. The words echoed, a hollow clang in the silence. Who was he? Another victim. Another inheritor. My gaze drifted from the gouged wood to the scattered papers near the old trunk. A faded map, yellowed and brittle, lay half unfurled beneath a heavy, tarnished locket. It wasn't a map of the house, nor the surrounding woods. This was different. A grid of unfamiliar streets, a dense urban sprawl, and a crude, hand-drawn circle marked with an X over what looked like a sprawling, rectangular building. Scrawled beside it, in a hurried, spidery hand, were two words, the vestibule. And beneath that, an address. An address that wasn't here, wasn't near the manor. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a breadcrumb deliberately left. A part of me screamed to ignore it, to burn the map and run, but a stronger, more desperate part, the part that still heard my wife's laughter in the quiet corners of the house, craved answers. I had to know. I had to understand what had taken her, what was trying to take me. The drive was a blur, a monotonous drone of the engine against the rising tension in my chest. The landscape shifted from dense forest to forgotten industrial zones, then to the tired outskirts of a city that seemed to have given up. The address led me to a colossal skeleton of a building, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over a cracked, weed-choked parking lot. An abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong. The air here was still, thick with the scent of damp concrete and stagnant water, a pervasive mildew that clung to the back of my throat. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on broken glass. The main entrance, a gaping maw of shattered automatic doors, beckoned. The vast concourse stretched before me, lined with skeletal storefronts, their signs faded, some ripped away entirely. A single rusted shopping cart lay overturned in the middle, a macabre sentinel. The map had a specific marking, a crudely drawn arrow pointing towards what looked like a service corridor at the far end of the defunct food court. I felt watched, not by a person, but by the decaying structure itself, its peeling paint and crumbling plaster like an ancient skin flaking away. It wasn't just the decay, it was something else, a palpable sense of lingering despair. I found the corridor, tucked away behind a collapsed pretzel stand. The map indicated a specific door, unmarked at the end of a long, narrow passage. I pushed it open. It groaned, a tortured sound that scraped against my nerves. Inside was not another storage room, but a small, deliberately arranged space. No, not arranged, curated. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak light from a high window. On the table, open, lay a thick, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with the same spidery script from the map, but here the words flowed in a horrifying current. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The journal belonged to my great-grandfather, a name I barely recognized from old family trees. His account, dated decades ago, detailed a history I never knew. Generations of my family, reaching back centuries, had made a pact, not for power, not for wealth, but for survival. To evade a different, unnamed horror that stalked their lineage, they had bound themselves to something else. The chorale of echoes. The words swam before my eyes, then sharpened into brutal clarity. The entity demanded an anchor, a vessel, not a sacrifice in blood, but in mind, in spirit. Every few generations, a designated inheritor was chosen to become the nexus, the doorway for the chorale's presence in this world. It described Elias Thorne, my great-grandfather's brother, as the previous anchor, consumed by the entity, his memories devoured until nothing but a shell remained. Taken, my breath hitched, my wife, her death, my grief. It was all a lure, a carefully orchestrated path. I wasn't just a victim stumbled into a horror. I was the designated inheritor, the next anchor, the chosen one. My hands grew clammy, the journal slick in my grasp. The air in the room grew heavy, like a suffocating blanket. It was the core ale. It was here. It was waiting. My eyes darted around the room. The photographs on the shelves, faded and sepia-toned, showed men and women, my ancestors, their eyes vacant, their faces gaunt, their smiles too wide, too fixed, devoured. I dropped the journal. It landed with a soft thud, its pages splaying open to a crudely drawn family tree. I felt a sudden, dizzying lurch, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. My vision blurred at the edges. Was this it? Was this how it began? What did they hope to gain by sacrificing me? The metallic tang still coated my tongue, a taste like old pennies and something else, something I couldn't quite name, but that felt ancient and wrong. Elias Thorne. Taken. The word echoed in the hollow space behind my eyes. A cold, hard stone dropped into a deep well. This house wasn't just old, it was hungry, and I was standing in its maw. I had to leave. The thought was a desperate, urgent clawing in my skull, overriding the numbness that had settled after the chilling revelation. This wasn't grief, not anymore. This was a trap. I spun, my gaze darting around the study. The books, the dusty furniture, the very air seemed to press in, thick with unseen presences. I stumbled towards the door, my legs stiff, each step a heavy drag against the floorboards. The light from the study barely reached the far end, where the main entrance lay. I needed keys, my coat, anything. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged, shallow thing. The front door, just the front door. I fumbled with the heavy brass knob, my fingers numb and clumsy. I pushed, I pulled, I twisted with a frantic energy I didn't know I still possessed. A low groan rumbled through the floorboards, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the house, reverberating up through my feet. The wood around the frame seemed to swell, gripping the door tighter. I gritted my teeth, throwing my shoulder against it with a desperate shout. With a sudden, violent crack that made me jump back, the door wrenched open. A blast of frigid air hit me, carrying the scent of damp earth and something acrid like burnt sugar. I gasped, sucking it in, and stumbled out onto the porch. Relief, sharp and sudden, flooded me. I was out. The sky above was a bruised gray, heavy with unspoken weather. The gravel path stretched out, leading to the long, winding drive. Freedom. But as I took a second breath, the cold air no longer felt clean. It tasted like static, like ozone after a lightning strike, but without the storm. The oak tree, I realized, was wrong. Its branches weren't just bare, they twisted into impassable angles, like ligaments snapped and reknit by a clumsy surgeon. The gravel path beneath my feet felt strangely soft, almost spongy, and the familiar crunch was absent. I looked down the drive. It wasn't the long, winding ribbon of asphalt I remembered. Instead, the asphalt buckled and cracked, not from neglect, but as if it had been folded in on itself. The world had shifted. I started to walk, then run down the warped drive. My feet felt heavy, as if I were wading through unseen mud. The air grew thicker, denser, each breath a struggle. The landscape kept changing, subtly at first, then with disorienting speed. The sky pressed lower, the bruised grey replaced by a sickly yellow glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The ground beneath me became cracked pavement, littered with shattered glass, and something that crunched like desiccated leaves, but smelled faintly of stale popcorn. The air was still and heavy, carrying the metallic tang I now knew too well, mixed with the cloying sweetness of decay. My surroundings solidified into a vast, echoing space, its ceiling lost in the yellow haze. Broken fluorescent light tubes dangled from exposed conduits. Walls of peeling paint rose on either side, interrupted by gaping storefronts, their windows either boarded up or shattered into crystalline dust. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. How? How had I gotten here? I had been on the drive just moments ago. This wasn't possible. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of my own shoes on the debris. My skin prickled. I started to run again, weaving through the fallen ceiling tiles and discarded mannequins, their featureless faces staring blankly into the gloom. I saw an exit sign, a faded green rectangle hanging crookedly above a set of fire doors. Hope, a desperate, irrational flicker, surged through me. Just as my hand reached for the cold metal bar of the fire door, the floor beneath me pitched violently. I cried out, losing my footing and slammed down onto the concrete. The yellow light pulsed, brightening and dimming, throwing the cavernous space into sickening relief. I felt a pressure, immense and invisible, pressing down on me, forcing the air from my lungs. It was as if the entire mall, the entire warped reality, was collapsing in on itself, with me at its center. Then a sudden, searing pain ripped through my back, as if 1,000 unseen hands had grabbed hold of my clothes, my skin, and were dragging me. I screamed, clawing at the broken concrete, my nails scraping uselessly. My vision blurred, the yellow light exploding into blinding white, then plunging into an inky blackness. When I finally opened my eyes, the yellow light was gone. The stale popcorn smell was gone. The shattered glass and broken mannequins were gone. My breath hitched. The front door was shut, locked tight, as if it had never been opened. The house was silent, save for the frantic thumping of my own heart. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. My hands trembled. My clothes were torn, a long, angry scratch weeping blood just below my collarbone. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the grit and dust that clung to my skin. I had been outside. I had seen the warped trees, the impassable road, the abandoned mall. I had felt the pressure, the dragging force, but here I was back inside, the door sealed. It wasn't just the house. It was everywhere. It was everything. The world outside, reality itself, was just another extension of its will. There was no escape. The whispers in the abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong, didn't recede. They solidified, a swirling vortex of sound, each faint voice a tiny, sharp needle pricking at the edges of my hearing. My skin crawled, a cold, gritty sensation, like dust settling on exposed nerves. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a chunk of fallen plaster, sending a cloud of fine, grey powder billowing around my ankles. The air, already thick with the smell of stale water and forgotten dreams, seemed to grow heavier, pressing in, making my lungs ache with each shallow breath. My eyes darted across the desolate expanse of what was once a bustling food court. Empty storefronts yawned like toothless mouths, their signs ripped down, leaving faded rectangles of brighter paint on the grimy walls. The floor, a mosaic of cracked tiles and scattered debris, reflected the weak, dying light from a few emergency lamps still clinging to life overhead. I flinched, spinning, but saw nothing but the warped reflection of my own terrified face in a broken display case. My reflection looked gaunt, eyes wide and bloodshot, a stranger staring back. "Consume," another voice sighed, like wind through a crevice, carrying the faint, metallic tang of rust and something else, something foul and ancient. It wasn't just sound. It was a feeling, a sickening lurch in my gut, a dizzying sense of displacement. The geometry of the mall seemed to warp, the long corridors stretching impassably, the ceiling pressing down, then soaring away. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against my skull. Was I seeing this, or was my mind finally fracturing? I clutched at my temples, digging my fingers into my scalp, trying to force the world back into its proper shape. They spoke of hunger, of emptiness, of endless duration. They spoke of me. Then a sudden, blinding clarity. It wasn't just noise, it was information, forced into my consciousness, bypassing my ears, burrowing directly into my thoughts. The chorale. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a parasitic intelligence, ancient beyond comprehension, existing in the spaces between things, fed on consciousness, on memory, on the very essence of self. My grief, my sorrow for my wife, had been an open wound, an invitation. It wanted to anchor itself, to become solid, to fully manifest in this reality, and my mind was the conduit, the perfect vessel. It would consume everything I was, every memory, every thought, every emotion, until only an empty shell remained, a puppet for its will. My family's pact. It wasn't about control. It was about feeding the thing, offering it a place to stay, generation after generation. I remembered the journals. My grandmother's frantic, elegant script detailing the cycles, the signs, the harvest. There was a passage almost hidden, obscured by frantic crossouts and ink blots, a countermeasure. Not a defeat, not an eradication, but a repulsion. A temporary banishment. It spoke of a specific object, something deeply personal, imbued with a powerful, singular memory and a sacrifice. Not blood, not flesh, but a piece of self. A memory, the most precious, the most painful. My hand instinctively went to the small, tarnished silver locket I still wore beneath my shirt. It was my wife's. It contained a tiny, faded photograph of us, laughing years ago before everything went wrong. This was the object. This was the conduit, the memory of her. The last happy one, the one I clung to like a drowning man to driftwood. To offer that, to willingly sever it, to let it be consumed not by grief, but by a deliberate act of will. It was a terrifying thought. It would mean losing her twice. But if I didn't, I would lose everything. And he would be lost with me, another voice in the chorale. The mall's vast interior groaned, a deep metallic sound like a ship's hull twisting in a storm. Dust rained down in sheets from the exposed ceiling girders. It was close. It was hungry. I had to prepare. I had to get back to the manor. The journals had spoken of a specific time, a convergence. I had to be ready. Could I really do it? Could I truly sacrifice the last shard of my past, the last vestige of her, to save myself, to save what little sanity I had left? Or would it simply open the door wider? The smell of stagnant water and forgotten food waste pressed in, thick and cloying. Above me, the skeletal remains of escalators stretched into a gloom that was too deep, too absolute for even a neglected building. I pushed myself up, my palms scraping against loose grit. My breath hitched, a jagged intake of air that tasted of mildew and decay. The voices. They were fragments, shards of conversations, laughter, cries all echoing, overlapping, creating a deafening cacophony that vibrated in my teeth. My head throbbed. I closed my eyes, pressing my hands against my temples, trying to shut out the assault. When I opened them, the fluorescent hum of the mall was gone. The harsh, broken tiles beneath my feet were no longer there. I was standing on damp, splintered floorboards. The air was heavy with the familiar scent of old wood, dust, and something else, something metallic, like old blood, clinging to the very fabric of the house. The grand hall of the manor stretched before me, but it was wrong. The walls pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, and the ornate wallpaper seemed to writhe, patterns shifting like disturbed insects. I hadn't left the manor at all. The abandoned mall, urban exploration gone wrong, was a trap, a mental detour, a cruel joke played by whatever resided here. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It hadn't been real, none of it. I wouldn't be fooled again. I wouldn't run. My eyes scanned the hall. The portraits lining the walls, my ancestors, their eyes black pits, shifted. Their painted lips moved, silently mouthing the cacophony that still screamed in my head. The chorale of echoes. That was its name. That was what it fed on, memories, grief, fear. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the brittle, leather-bound journal, the one from my grandmother, filled with her frantic, coded entries. It was an act, a disruption, a refusal to echo. I walked toward the center of the hall, each step deliberate, heavy. The floorboards groaned beneath me, not just from my weight, but with an unnatural, wet sound. I could feel its presence now, not just hear it. A vast, formless hunger swirling around me, testing my resolve. "I know what I am," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. The words felt like stones in my throat, but they were mine. "I know what I take." The air around me shimmered. A faint, almost transparent figure coalesced in front of me. It was her, my wife. Her smile was soft, her eyes full of the warmth I remembered, the warmth I craved, rest. My breath hitched, my eyes burned. This was its strongest weapon, its cruelest trick, to show me what I had lost, what I longed for, to break me with the very love that was supposed to sustain me. I clenched my jaw, digging my nails into the journal. This wasn't her. It was a lie, an echo. "You don't get to use her," I growled, the words tearing from my chest. I lifted the journal, its pages fluttering as if in a phantom breeze. "You don't get to keep her." The spectral image of my wife flickered, her smile twisting into something grotesque, something inhuman. I opened the journal to the last page, the one with the strange symbols, the one my grandmother had marked as the cleansing. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It wasn't about incantations. It was about severing, about unmaking. I held the journal aloft, my hand trembling, but my gaze fixed on the malevolent distortion of my wife. "This ends," I said, my voice rising above the din. No more echoes. The walls of the hall began to bleed, not blood but memories. Images flashed across the surfaces, a child crying, a woman laughing, a man screaming. My ancestors living out their tormented lives, their suffering now projected for me, fuel for the entity. The floor beneath me buckled. I knew what I had to do. A denial of its power source. I ripped a page from the journal, the parchment dry and brittle, tearing with a sound like splintering bone. This was the page detailing the first pact, the origin of the Corail in my family line. The air vibrated with a force that threatened to tear my eardrums. The apparition of my wife screamed, a sound that was not human, not animal, but something ancient and utterly alien. I held the page over a flickering, phantom flame that had manifested on a nearby pedestal. The paper caught, curling inward, the symbols charring, turning to ash. The light in the hall pulsed violently, blindingly. The voices in my head became a single, piercing shriek. There was this working, or was I just feeding it more of my fear, my despair, my very essence? The entity's presence swelled, suffocating, pressing down on me. I felt my knees buckle, the strength draining from my limbs. The house groaned, the timbers twisting, groaning. Was it the house, or was it me? The world dissolved around me. The buckling floor of the manor hall gave way not to solid earth, but to a swirling vortex of color and sound. It felt like being pulled through a keyhole, stretched and compressed, every nerve screaming as the familiar architecture of my ancestral home shattered into 1,000 shards of impassable light. Then, with a jarring lurch that rattled my teeth, I landed hard on something cold and grimy. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of grey light filtering through a grimy skylight far above. The air tasted of decay, a metallic tang mixed with stale popcorn and something vaguely chemical, like forgotten cleaning solutions. I pushed myself up, my knees protesting, and looked around. This wasn't the manor, not even close. The phrase echoed in my mind, an intrusive thought, as if someone else had placed it there. Storefronts, skeletal and gaping, lined a wide concourse, their display windows long shattered or boarded up. Faded advertisements clung to peeling walls, promoting long-defunct brands. A broken escalator, its steps frozen in an eternal climb, stretched upwards into shadows. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water somewhere far off and the crunch of broken glass beneath my shoes. This was its domain now, or perhaps its chosen arena. The Corail of Echoes. It had brought me here, to this monument of forgotten commerce, a graveyard of desires. My breath hitched, not from any specific direction, but everywhere at once, a chorus of hushed voices that brushed against my eardrums like dry leaves skittering across concrete. They spoke in tongues I didn't understand, yet the meaning was clear. Mine. They were claiming me. Storefront mannequins, stripped bare and scattered, seemed to shift at the edges of my vision, their blank faces turning towards me, my own memories, twisted and amplified, weaponized. It was the echo of everything that had ever been, condensed into a malevolent hunger. The light flickered, not from faulty wiring, but as if the world itself was struggling to maintain its form. The ceiling above, once a grid of acoustic tiles, began to ripple, stretching and contracting like taut skin. It was trying to break me, to devour my sanity before it devoured my flesh. I closed my eyes, pressing my hands over my ears, but the sound was internal, resonating inside my skull. It wanted me to drown in the pain, to become a willing vessel, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. My wife. Her memory was the one thing I held onto, the anchor in the storm of grief. It was also the bait, the fuel. The entity wanted that pain, that deep, raw sorrow. It wanted me to give it to her, to let it consume her memory along with mine. This was the sacrifice. Not my life, not my body, but the very essence of my grief. I had to let go. Not forget her, never forget her, but to sever the cords of agony that bound me to her loss. The very cords the entity was now tugging on, reeling me in. It was a choice between continuing to suffer and thereby feeding this thing, or finding a way to transform that pain into something else, something it couldn't consume. My eyes snapped open. The mall was a maelstrom of visual and auditory distortion. I focused on the image of my wife, not the pain, not the absence, but the joy she brought, the warmth of her hand in mine. And then I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I pushed it away. Not her, but the pain associated with her. With a guttural roar that tore from my own throat, I ripped at those tendrils, not with my hands, but with an act of pure, desperate will. It felt like tearing my own soul, an agonizing, visceral severance. The entity shrieked. It was a sound that didn't belong to this world, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and sudden, unexpected starvation. The cacophony of voices fractured, breaking into terrified whimpers. The ceiling settled, the impassable ripples smoothing out. The mannequins stood frozen once more, their blank stares fixed on nothing. I stood there, gasping, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. My body ached as if I'd been beaten, but the internal pressure was gone. The connection severed. I had starved it, or at least removed its primary food source. But the cost? A vast, echoing chamber where my grief once resided. The memory of my wife was still there, a faint, beautiful ember, but the searing, all-consuming pain that had defined my existence for so long was gone, replaced by a numb, aching emptiness. Had I truly banished the chorale of echoes, or merely sent it into a temporary retreat, its hunger now redirected, searching for new sustenance in the forgotten corners of this abandoned place? The world had dissolved, indeed. The violent compression, the shrieking, tearing sound that felt less like an external noise and more like my own consciousness being flayed, gave way with a sudden, sickening lurch. I hit something hard, unforgiving, with a wheezing gasp that emptied my lungs. My vision swam, a riot of grey and muted color, before slowly resolving into something concrete, something horrifyingly mundane. I was lying on a floor of cracked, discolored linoleum, smelling of dust, mildew, and something acrid, metallic, perhaps stale rain or forgotten chemicals. Above me, a vast, decaying ceiling of acoustic tiles stretched into gloom, punctuated by skeletal fluorescent light fixtures that hung like broken teeth. This wasn't anywhere I knew. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent beat against my temples. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting with every movement, my joints stiff and aching. Around me, an echo chamber of neglect. Empty storefronts, their windows opaque with grime, stared out like vacant eyes. A faded mannequin, its plastic skin yellowed and cracked, leaned precariously against a display case shattered years ago. The air was cold still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of decay. The sheer banality of it, after the kaleidoscopic horror of the vortex, was its own brand of terror. How could I be here? How could any of this be real? The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water somewhere far off, a sound that seemed to magnify the emptiness. My hand went to my chest. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, and leaned against a support column covered in peeling paint. Had I escaped? Had the entity's grip, for a moment, loosened, spitting me out into this desolate husk of commerce? I remembered the tearing, the sensation of my very being stretched thin. It had felt like a battle, a desperate, silent struggle within that impassable vortex. I had fought, yes. I had clawed at the dissolving edges of my own reality, refusing to be unmade. And then there was a final, desperate surge within me, a scream that tore through my throat but made no sound, a raw, primal rejection of the melding, the absorption. It was a refusal to become just another echo. A low hum vibrated through the floor, barely perceptible, but I felt it in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. It was a familiar hum, one that had haunted the manor's walls, a subtle chorus beneath the surface of reality. It was the chorale of echoes, and it was here with me. Or was it in me? I staggered down the main concourse, the sound of my own footsteps unnervingly loud in the vast space. The storefronts blurred into a continuous tunnel of decay. My reflection caught my eye in a grimy window, a gaunt, wild-eyed man, hair disheveled, clothes streaked with grime. But it wasn't just my reflection. For a split second, the outline of my face seemed to ripple, to stretch and pull, as if a faint, almost invisible current ran beneath my skin. Then it was gone, leaving only my pallid, horrified gaze staring back. My eyes, though, they seemed deeper, wider. And perhaps, for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of something ancient, something other in their depths. The hum intensified, no longer just a vibration, but a low, sustained note that resonated in my skull. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within. My head snapped up. The vast, decaying ceiling of the mall began to shimmer, not with light, but with an internal vibration, as if the very air was being stretched. This was no escape. This was a new stage. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against my ears, trying to shut out the rising tide of sound, trying to quell the terrifying realization blooming in my gut. When I opened them again, the mall was gone. I was standing in the great hall of the manor. It was quiet, too quiet. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood, but also something else, something subtly metallic and sweet, like ozone after a storm. The buckling floor, the one that had given way, was solid beneath my feet, but it was different. The walls pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible light, a soft, grayish luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very stone. The immediate threat, the consuming vortex, had vanished. The crushing pressure in my mind had eased, replaced by a strange, unsettling clarity. I walked through the hall, my hand trailing along the cold stone. It felt alive, not in a comforting way, but like a vast, dormant organism. The house had changed. It was no longer just an old building, but something else entirely, something woven from the very fabric of the entity's presence. I stopped before the large, ornate mirror in the drawing room. My reflection stared back, still gaunt, still haunted, but the flicker I'd seen in the mall window was more pronounced now. Beneath the surface of my skin, a subtle current seemed to flow, an internal light that pulsed with the same faint luminescence as the manor walls. My eyes, they were no longer simply my own. The pupils seemed to swirl, not with the color of my own irises, but with the muted shifting hues of that impassable vortex. Not a sound I heard with my ears, but a thought, a presence. "Welcome, William." It was the chorale, but it wasn't outside me. It was inside. It was my own voice, yet not my own. A harmony of countless others, all speaking through me to me. I reached out, touching the cold glass of the mirror. My reflection reached back, its hand passing through the surface, not shattering it, but rippling it like disturbed water. The entity hadn't been neutralized. It had simply found a new conduit, a new host. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It was in me. My mind, my body, my very essence now served as its nexus. The horrors weren't over. They had just begun, with me as their reluctant, unwilling maestro. How much of me was left, and how much was already an echo of the chorale?